The Modern format is one of the most popular formats in the entire game. It has a vast card pool with a ton of different strategies. Every main set since 8th edition is legal, as well as cards printed directly in the Modern from the Modern Horizon sets. An easy way to identify a Modern card is that it has the Modern card frame, hence the name. The format started life on Magic Online in May of 2011, before becoming an official format on August of the same year, and eventually went on to replace the Extended format, and Extended was officially retired in August of 2013. Since Extended was a format that still rotated, though with less sets giving a longer lifespan in the format, Modern was a popular replacement since there was no rotation at all. When Modern became official, Wizards directly said they wanted to be a turn 4 format, meaning that no deck should be able to win before the 4th turn. Though Modern existed before it became official, when it did, so too did a lot of preemptive bans come with it, based on cards from the Legacy and Extended formats that were problems. There was also the Community Cup tournament hosted on Magic Online they held that contributed to figuring out what cards would be too powerful in the format. Before we get to the history, I gotta do my obligatory YouTuber plug, so if you like what you see, drop a like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Anyways, let's get to the actual good stuff. All this cultivated in the Banlist of August 2011, along with the birth of Modern itself, going from an online-only format to a fully supported one for paper play. The cards in this Banlist included Ancestral Vision, Bitter Blossom, Dread Return, Glimpse of Nature, Golgari Grave Troll, Hypergenesis, Jace the Mind Sculptor, Mental Misstep, Stoneforge Mystic, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, Sensei's Divining Top, Chrome Mox, Dark Depth, Skull Clamp, Sword of the Meek, Umizawa's Jite, and all of the Artifact basic lands. Let's start with Ancestral Vision. This card isn't very good in Modern anymore, but for Wizards, they thought it would give too much card advantage and make control a little bit too good at the birth of the format. It is a fantastic card to draw turn 1, as you essentially have a Power 9 card 4 turns later. Since they wanted Modern to be a 4-turn format, this just made the card even better in their eyes. It was eventually unbanned in April of 2016, which we'll get to later, but it's hardly played at all anymore. Bitter Blossom is a card that could easily be cast on turn 1, and immediately start making 1/1 flyers each turn. Not only that, it synergized incredibly well in fairy decks. It could run cards like Spellstutter Sprite to make them even easier to counter potential answers. Since you were constantly getting fairies each turn, combat became trivial as you always had a bunch of chump blockers for you. This let you hold up counter spells for more threatening spells. Since these all have flying as well, they also just became hard to block, making for an incredible tempo deck that could get going pretty much immediately. The card was eventually unbanned in February of 2014. Like many cards from the initial list, Bitter Blossom is doing very little in the current metagame after coming back. Dread Return is probably the easiest card to explain. It can return any creature to the battlefield for 4 mana. If it was in your graveyard, you could have cast it essentially for free by just sacrificing 3 creatures. It was a star of Dredge decks, and cards like Necro Amoeba could bring themselves out for free for sacrifice fodder. Since you'd be milling a bunch of cards with Dredge, this made doing so trivial. Dredge also set up your graveyard with cards you'd want to reanimate. Bridge from Below was also legal at this time, making the archetype just that much better. Unlike a lot of other cards from this lot of banlists, Dread Return remains banned, and frankly it's probably never going to be unbanned. Glimpse of Nature is another banned Modern card that has never actually seen the chance to see play in the format. It was a 1 mana spell that let you draw basically a whole deck in elf combo decks. Since you'd primarily play 1-drop elves, you were able to use Heritage Rooted and Nettle Sentinel to make infinite mana so you could always cast more creature spells, which then drew you into more cards. The combo was incredibly easy to pull off, winning games as early as the 2nd turn. This card is unlikely to ever be unbanned for how easy it is to combo with it, and at the end of the day it breaks the one rule of they don't want Modern to be a 4-turn format. Golgari Grave Troll was banned as it was expected that Dredge decks would dominate the format with it included. After all, it can easily hit the field with a ton of +1/+1 counters and had built-in protection that made it very hard to get rid of. Golgari Grave Troll was actually unbanned in January 2015 before going back to being banned just 2 years later. It was just too good at enabling Dredge and getting cards in the graveyard, and acted as one of the best Dredge enablers in the entire format. Milling 6 cards for free in a deck that wants cards in the graveyard was just way too powerful. Hypergenesis is a card that was banned in Modern was created because it was just obvious how good it would be. For 3 mana, you could dump your entire hand onto the battlefield. Any boss monster with a giant casting cost like Emrakul could be put on the battlefield for free. Though it had to spend 3, the payoff is more than worth it, considering that you put your cards on the field that just won you the game. Even if your opponent didn't have anything to put on their battlefield, you could still put however much you wanted on your battlefield. Hypergenesis never had the opportunity to break anything in Modern, and probably will never happen. Jace the Mind Sculptor already showed its power during its period in Standard, and is one of the best Planeswalker cards ever printed. Being able to control your opponent's top decks, a recurable brainstorm, and a way to bounce creatures proved to be really powerful for tempo and control decks, all for just 4 mana. The card was an absolute menace in Standard, and even had to be banned out of that format. So when it came time to create Modern, it was banned before it ever saw play during the infancy stages of the format. It was eventually unbanned in February of 2018, and it still sees plays in variants of Izzet Murktide decks and Azorius controls. It isn't necessarily game-breaking, but it's still a very solid card that still sees played in the modern day. Mental Misstep proved itself in Legacy as one of its best cards, and it only costs 2 life to pay, making it essentially free to shut down any 1-drop. The life cost didn't matter, as life doesn't matter until your life hits 0. You could use blue mana if you really wanted to, but you usually never did this. It was to the point where other players would stack up Mental Missteps just to make sure they'd be able to counter your opponent's Mental Missteps. From seeing how Mental Misstep warped other formats, it was taken out of Modern before it even had the chance to be inside of it, and remains on the ban list to this day. On the Storage Force Mystic, this was another star of the standard it was featured in, taking advantage of a ton of powerful equipment spells, especially ones with Living Weapon. It was banned in standard just 2 months prior to the creation of Modern, and it was determined that the power level of it would just be too strong for the Modern format and make equipment decks just too good. It did become unrestricted in August of 2019 when Wizards wanted to push creature decks more to the dominance of graveyard decks at the time. The card isn't breaking the format, but Hammer Time decks are a solid meta contender. Valakut was the card that spent perhaps the least amount of time of any card in Modern, being banned for only a year as it was unbanned in September of 2012. It was deemed to not be a problem anymore and slow enough to provide a fair game. Valakut decks were bolstered by Primordial Titan, which let you easily trigger Valakut to deal multiple instances of burn damage. The combo deck is strong, and Amulet Titan is a powerful meta contender in the current metagame. We're almost through the first wave of bans, it'll go much quicker once we're through. Sensei's Divining Top is still banned to this day, and was banned because of how strong it is with counterbalance. It was very easy to ensure you'd put a card you can counter with on top of your library. Decks utilizing this combo were a menace in Legacy, and this even led to it being banned in Legacy down the line. The combo was incredibly strong, and Wizards didn't want it in the format to turn people away from its generally unfun play patterns. Chrome Mox was one of the few fast mana cards that were legal in the early days of the format. It made casting out 2 mana spells on turn 1 trivial, since you didn't need to spend mana to cast it. You could bring down cards that start generating value right away, allowing you to get ahead of your opponent before they even have a chance to play the game. You went down a card in your hand, sure, but it was worth it when you had an extra mana to play with all throughout your game. Due to how easily it provided free mana, Chrome Mox got hit by the ban hammer and has never seen true light of day in the format. Dark Depths saw plenty of extended play and still sees Legacy play today, which is why the card has been banned in Modern since its inception. While it may seem like it would take a while to make the 2020 token, when you have cards like Vampire Hexmage or Thespian Stage that can instantly put a Merit Lodge token onto the battlefield, the card becomes phenomenal. It was very easy to do and only required 2 mana to actually do so. You could get Merit Lodge out as early as turn 2, and a 2020 with flying and indestructible is far from anything to scoff at in any format. Wizards deemed the combo too powerful in Modern, and it's unlikely to see it unbanned anytime soon. Skullclamp was an absolute menace across multiple formats, and saw it banned during the standard and extended it was legal in, as well as being banned in Legacy. It was part of the Modern initial ban list, and it's unlikely that will ever change. Skullclamp is an incredible draw card, as it is very easy to create tokens with 1 toughness that you can equip with Skullclamp to just draw 2 cards. With archetypes like Goblins that can make a ton of tokens easily, especially with something like a Skirt Prospector that you recover the mana used to equip it, you could draw out your entire deck. If you're playing an Aristocrats deck that cares about your creatures dying as well, it's another way to easily trigger death triggers when you drew a bunch of cards to draw you more enablers. 3 more, we can do this, let's go. Sword of the Meek was banned because of its interaction with Thopter Foundry. While the combo didn't go against the turn 4 philosophy, it was seen as being too good against creature, aggro, and burn decks. Basically, Thopter Foundry would sacrifice Sword of the Meek to create a 1-1 Thopter and gain you a life. Since a 1-1 entered, Sword of the Meek returned to the battlefield attached to that creature. And you could do this as long as you had 1 mana to pay, making it much easier to recover from damage to your life while building up an army of flyers. Sword of the Meek did eventually get unbanned in April of 2016, and it still sees play in Thopter control decks in the current Modern. Umizar's Yite was preemptively hit to make sure creature decks could actually be in the format. Umizar's Yite is deceptively powerful, as moving counters could easily destroy creatures by giving them -1/-1, or by boosting the stats of your own to make sure you'd be able to win any combat step. You could even gain life if you wanted to. It was so easy to put counters on it, as dealing damage with the equipped creature gave you 2 counters. The effects that require removal of a counter aren't once per turn either, making it just that much easy to win against any creature deck. The card is still banned, though it has an argument that it would be fine if it came off due to how fast the format has become. And we've made it to the last of the initial ban list, and that's with the Artifact basic lands. These are very easy to explain. Affinity fucking destroyed Standard, requiring multiple bans to ensure the format would still be fun to play because Affinity was widely hated and very consistent. It still is one of the largest ban lists of all time. Since the lands were artifacts that could still tap for mana, it boosted up your affinity count and made spells just that much easier to cast since they could still be tapped for mana. Though more artifact lands have been printed, Artifact still remains at bay in the meta, but if artifact lands were to ever be unbanned, they'd immediately make a statement. Oh my god, that took forever to get through. And we have one more big modern ban list to get through. Luckily, it is a lot smaller, but still pretty big. As Modern started to form its meta after its first month, another ban list came out in September of 2011, while Blazing Soul, Cloud Post, Green Sun Zenith, Ponder, Preordain, and Rite of Flame were all banned. Free spells are usually always good, and Blazing Soul is no exception. You can remove a red card from your hand, and its converted mana cost would boost the power of a creature by that much. It was played in an Infect deck that utilized Blighted Agent and Inkmoth Nexus, both creatures with Infect that are hard if not impossible to block sometimes, especially early on in the game. You'd attack with one of them, then pitch a massive spell like Dragonstorm or Progentius to instantly deal enough damage to win with poison counters in just one turn. Since this could be done as early as turn 2, it was swiftly banned for breaking Wizard's rule of not having any deck that could win by turn 4. The card is still banned to this day and will likely stay there just because of Infect. Cloud Post is rather ridiculous. All modern players today know about Tron and how wow and fuck it is, but Cloud Post was Tron on crack. Instead of maxing out as like 6 mana from the 3 other lands, how about just tapping one Cloud Post for like 5 mana? It was easy to get a ton of Locusts on the battlefield since you had multiple copies of Cloud Post as well as Glimmer Post and land copies like Vesuva. The ramping that Cloudbow decks could do was absolutely absurd, and it was swiftly banned after 1 month after the overflowing amounts of mana a Cloud Post could produce on its own. Green Sun Zenith was actually a pretty unique banning. It wasn't banned because it fetched out a strong creature, but because it fetched out Dryad Arbor. Since Dryad Arbor was a creature, you could get it for just 1 green mana, and then you essentially used it to bring out a mana dork. It was a fantastic and easy way to ramp, especially if you were already playing cards like Llanowar Elves. It made decks able to get 2 mana on turn 1 much easier. While Dryad Arbor could have taken the bullet for this, Wizards decided that Green Sun Zenith was more likely to cause future problems, so that's why this card was banned. Moving on to Ponder, and well, we can just chuck it in with Preordain too because they were banned for basically the same reason. They were too good for Storm. 1 mana spells are always going to be strong for Storm decks, especially ones that help you draw into more of your Storm enablers. It also allowed generic blue decks to get more consistency from altering their top decks and drawing extra cards for very cheap. Storm control decks all flocked to Ponder and Preordain and made them just a bit too good to the point of being banned where they remain to this day. And lastly we have Rite of Flame. Just look at this card. Can you guess what kind of deck this made too good? Would you believe me if I told you it was mono red aggro? Because you shouldn't. Because of course it was Storm. Rite of Flame was a net positive of 1 mana when you cast it, and it could very quickly become a better Dark Ritual once your graveyard was loaded up. When you toss in Pyromancer's Ascension that let you copy the spell, this allowed you to gain a ludicrous amount of mana, allowing to cast a ton more spells to quickly get the Storm count out of hand. It very easily broke Modern's turn 4 rule, so banning it was a no-brainer. And it remains banned, and it likely won't be turning anytime soon along with plenty of other Storm cards. Now let's move to the last ban list of 2011. This happened in December where 2 cards got hit, Punishing Fire and Wild in the Cattle. Let's start with the one that more accurately deserved to be banned, and that's Punishing Fire. The card is a simple 2 mana burn spell that deals 2 damage. How on earth could it be broken? Well, the fact you can recycle it easily. Whenever an opponent gains life by paying 1 red mana, you gotta add it back to your hand. While this may seem restrictive, it isn't when you can force the life drain with Grove of the Burnwillows. It gives you either a red or green mana, meaning by tapping it, you would have the mana to use its effect to put it back in your hand, because your opponent is gaining life. This was a net loss of 1 life for your opponent, and that's not counting any other burn spell you'd have. Even if you weren't using it to deal damage to face, you could use it to deal damage to creatures, making any creatures with toughness 2 or less into something that couldn't be used against decks running Punishing Fire. They were punished for it. Let's move on to something more actually funny. Wild in the Cattle's banned. Yes, for all you new heads out there, this card used to actually be banned. A card that at best is just a 3/3 vanilla creature. In the early days of Modern, Naya Zoo decks were pretty powerful actually, and that was because Wild in the Cattle was just such a strong 1-drop. When you're playing lands that act as multiple land types, you could bring Wild in the Cattle down early on and they'd have pretty solid stats. Naya or 5-color Zoo decks were immensely popular, so much so that Wild in the Cattle was just the face of Modern creature decks. Every creature-based strategy was basically a Zoo deck with maxed out copies of Wild in the Cattle. You'd attack with all the Zoo creatures that care about land types, and could end our game with Tribal Flames to do a bunch of burn damage after easy damage with creatures. This ban wouldn't stick around, and Wild in the Cattle would be unbanned in February of 2014, and while Zoo decks do occasionally show up in Magic Online Modern Leagues, it's far from the star it once was. Before we move on to more bans, there was one very small banlist update to Modern in September 2012, where Valakut the Molten Pinnacle would be the first Modern card ever unbanned. It serves a fantastic card, with the deck getting better as Amulet Titan gets more tools over the years, and Valakut the Molten Pinnacle is one of the key cards of the strategy, and is still a top deck in the current Modern format. Anyway, it's unbanned and boring. Let's talk about some more broken shit, baby! And what's more broken than Storm? Not a lot. In January of 2013, Seething Song got hit by the ban list along with Bloodbraid Elf. When Storm decks are the best decks that are also very consistent, it's often because of some stupid enabler, and for this era of Modern, it was Seething Song. Unlike other ritual spells, Seething Song put you up 2 mana as opposed to just 1. This allowed you to be able to cast more spells much more consistently, and gave you extra mana if you were able to discount Seething Song as well. I could go over why Storm is broken again, but I could just copy and paste what I said last time when I talked about Radiflame, and it'd be just applicable here, so let's just move on. Bloodbraid Elf is an interesting case of a card. The card is solid, but it's not broken by any means, it's just a 4 mana card with a Cascade and Haste. This meant that it came out with another spell that was 3 or less mana. The main reason it was banned was because of the deck it was in. Jund decks were winning just about everything during this time, and Wizards was sick of it. Every card you could cascade into was rather strong, hitting cards like Liliana of the Veil or Tomogif. These Jund lists won multiple events in a row, and Bloodbraid Elf was the card to be taken away from the deck. It did ultimately get unbanned in February 2018, and it isn't nearly as much as how it used to be, now only appearing as a niche card in Zoo and Domain decks, as well as Living End. The last ban of 2013, Second Sunrise, was banned in May of that year. It was a card that was taken advantage of in Egg decks, which are decks that play a bunch of cheap artifact spells that gain value when they go to the graveyard for effects such as Lotus Bloom or Pyrite Spellbomb, along with ones that draw cards like Chromatic Sur. After you used all these, you'd cast Second Sunrise or Face Reward to bring them all back, and continuously recycle them with Conjurer's Bauble, so you could always draw into them once your entire deck was empty to loop these effects. According to Wizards, the main reason for this ban wasn't because the deck was dominating, but because it took so long to play on matches. They mentioned large tournaments that go to time would have rounds delayed for almost entire hours in some cases, since it was deemed that the card could be banned out of the deck without affecting other decks, since Face Reward was much more narrow in the permanents it could bring back. There was actually only one ban list in 2014, and that occurred in February. Here, Blitterblossom would be unbanned, with another situation where a card on the first ban list was freed along with Wild and the Cattle. There was only one card banned, and it was Modern Superstar Deathrite Shaman. It is often cited as being the best one-drop in all of Modern, though it has some rivals now. In a format with fetch lands, Deathrite Shaman was a mana dork that could tap for any color, and be brought out by either green or black mana, allowing it to be splashed into multiple decks. It was Graveyard Hate that could help you grind out games in mid-range decks by burning life by exiling its inner sorceries, or gaining you life by exiling creatures. It was a staple in a ton of decks, and a superstar in Jund mid-range decks especially. It did so much for you for just 1 mana, and was banned out of the format, and is probably never going to return. Card is so good it's even banned in Legacy after all. As we enter 2015, we have another year where there was only one ban list for Modern, and that was released at the start of the year in January. Golgari Grave Troll was actually unbanned here, but that wouldn't last long, but we'll get to that later. More importantly, 3 cards are banned on this list, those being Dig Through Time, Treasure Cruise, and Birthing Pod. We talk about Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise at the same time because for the ban reasonings are basically the same, and it's that pesky line of text at the top of the card that says Delve. Delve is an incredibly broken mechanic. By exiling cards from your graveyard, you can discount spells based on the number of cards you exiled. And decks that don't care about the graveyard and colors with a ton of ways to cast cheap spells or fill up your graveyard, these are bound to be broken. Most of the time you could just ignore the generic mana part of the mana cost because you could just have the cards in your graveyard to discount them entirely. In a format with fetch lands and very cheap, sometimes free removal, it was very easy to fill up your graveyard. Many decks that played Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise hardly care about the graveyard and had no issue exiling cards from it. They were far too strong of cards, and they both ate bans and remain banned to this day. They're even banned in Legacy and restricted in Vintage because they're just that powerful. The outlier to the Delve cards on this ban list is Birthing Pod. Birthing Pod was a part of a combo deck that utilized Milia, Shilvok Outcast, and a Persist creature. This made it so when you sacrifice a Persist creature, it would just come back. But since Milia prevents these counters from going on your creatures, it would counteract the Persist ability that put a -1/-1 counter on that creature part of its cost. The combo generally used Kint and Finks to gain life, and Murderous Redcap to burn for lethal. When you combine it with Viscera Seer, you had an infinite sacrifice outlet. So where does Birthing Pod come in with this? It just added a lot of consistency to the deck. You could sacrifice a creature to Birthing Pod and get whatever creature you needed for the combo, or whatever creature could help you in that particular game state. Since you could bring them out directly from your deck, you could get away with running a bunch of one-of cards. If you had the Malaria and Persist combo, the creature you sacrificed to Birthing Pod would still stick around as well. Birthing Pod ate the ban, as the card was only going to get stronger as more cards are released. And now we come to, depending on who you are, perhaps the most tragic ban list of all time so far. In January of 2016, 2 cards were banned, Splinter Twin and Summer Bloom. Let's talk about Summer Bloom because it's much easier. It's a card that was played in a bunch of decks built around Amulet Titan. Basically, it comboed with bounce lands when you had Amulet of Vigor on the field, Since it untap the land, you tap it for mana before it bounces back to your hand, and let you make 6 mana on turn 2 to cast Primeval Titan right away. The Amulet Bloom deck was backed up by Hive Mind, which could be easily cast early with all the excess mana you make, and force your opponent to copy a Summoner's Pact so they lose the game since they wouldn't have any mana. It was banned because it goes against Wizards' turn 4 rule, and I mean, being able to play 3 extra lands was never not going to be broken, especially since they didn't need to be basic. Now let's talk about Splinter Twin. The card was banned since the deck was strong and Wizards wanted to keep a balanced metagame and prevent Splinter Twin decks from taking over. As the name implied, the deck is built around the aura Splinter Twin, which lets you tap to copy a creature to create a copy of it. It was put on creatures like Deceiver Exarch and Pestamite that would untap a permanent when it entered the battlefield. So you tap the creature with Splinter Twin on it, then create a copy that would enter and untap the enchanted creature, and you do this infinitely to make an army of tokens. Since these all had haste, you would win the turn you did this. You even had Kiki Jiki Mirrorbreaker as a backup plan that had the same effect as Splinter Twin. The deck is loved by some, hated by others. There are plenty of people out there arguing for its unban, and they think it's fine in the current metagame, while others are advocating that the new toys in Modern will make the deck even more consistent. I'm on neither side of this fence because I don't play Modern. You crazy kids have fun with that debate. Uh-oh, so it's Colin here, it's Eldrazi Winter time! Eldrazi Winter refers to a time period where Eldrazi decks were far and away the best decks and completely destroyed the format. This banlist takes us to April of 2016, when the last banlist made people flock to the new art deck. Most of the Eldrazi cards had a huge mana cost and were hard to cast because of it. However, in Oath of the Gatewatch, low-cost Eldrazi came out and that completely changed the game. Cards like Eldrazi Mimic and Endless One could be cast for free with Eye of Ugin on the battlefield, and when you mixed an Eldrazi Temple, you could cast 4 mana Eldrazi with a tapping of just Eldrazi Temple if Eye of Ugin was there as well. You could cast Thought Knot Seal as early as turn 2 to get rid of any card from your opponent's hand that might be able to interact with your board. The deck was incredibly fast and oppressive, and Eye of Ugin ate the ban on this list to rein in the deck's power from massive mana discounts. This ban list also freed both Sword of the Meek and Ancestral Vision. Since the format at the time was very aggro-centric, Wizard wanted to open up slower strategies by giving them some older toys. Though the Sword of the Meek combo was still legal, it was seen as being a slower control deck until the combo was ready, and was deemed alright to return to shake up the metagame. Entering 2017, a familiar friend was banned again, and that's Golgari Grave Troll. Gitaxian Probe was also banned on this same list, for the only ban of that year. Dredge decks were dominating the metagame at this time, and Golgari Grave Troll was the star of the deck. With more looting cards like Cathartic Reunion entering the format, the ability to set up the graveyard was as easy as ever. Getting the middle 6 cards with your Golgari Grave Troll was fantastic, and being able to easily dump it back was even better. With how powerful Dredge was, Golgari Grave Troll was banned once again, and is the only modern card that was ever unbanned that had to be banned again since the recording of this video. Looking at Gitaxian Probe, it's actually pretty easy to see why this card was banned. Since life is just a resource, paying 2 life is trivial, and you get a free card and information about your opponent's hand. Playing 4 copies of it made it so you were essentially playing a 56 card deck, since you could cycle away for free and get information from your opponent's hand. Doing it on turn 1 told you what you were playing against to see how to plan your game efficiently before they have a chance to actually do anything. If you were playing a combo deck, you could see if your opponent had interaction before you comboed off. It did so much for being quite literally free. Even though it was technically blue, since you could pay life, any deck running any color could play it. And later banned, and it's unlikely ever to return. It's banned and restricted in all formats it's playable in, except for Commander, because it's Commander. 2018 only saw one banlist update, and that was in February, where there was actually no bans, but 2 unbans of Jace the Mind Sculptor and Bloodbraid Elf. As Modern evolved as a format, Wizards decided these cards were fine to return. Since there was a lot more ways for aggressive decks to thrive, Jace the Mind Sculptor was seen as giving control a bone in the format instead of forcing in an explosive win condition by giving them Jace as a way to close out longer games. Bloodbraid Elf was originally banned due to the power of Jund Midrange, a deck and archetype that had grown to become quite varied. Bloodbraid Elf was unbanned since it was believed that its return wouldn't hurt deck diversity, and if anything increase it to allow more mid-range options to utilize different mana costs and styles of play. And now we enter a pretty broken era of Modern as we reach 2019. The first hit of the year happened in January where Crack Clan Ironworks was banned. This card was a combo enabler that let you make infinite mana by recycling artifacts you sacrifice with cards like Mirror Retriever and Scrap Trawler to make an infinite amount of colorless mana. You could draw through your deck with artifacts that only cost 1 mana and draw a card when sent to the graveyard like Chromatic Star and Terra Ion. It would then close out games with Pyrite Spellbomb, looped infinitely, or a casting of Emerald Cruelty Aeon's Torn for extra protection to the combo, and to combo more on the next turn if mana ever became an issue. The deck was very consistent and won multiple events, all while it took an obnoxious amount of time to get through. It's very similar to the second Sunrise ban I talked about earlier, which is why this card was banned. If you played Modern in 2019, you are probably very familiar with the dredge menace that is Hogak Arisen Necropolis. On the July 2019 ban list, one of the biggest cards from the deck that wasn't its namesake was banned, Bridge from Below. Bridge from Below is an enchantment that you don't really ever want to cast, but have in your graveyard instead. Since you were constantly milling yourself and dumping creatures into your graveyard, you'd make a ton of 2/2 zombie tokens for the high cost of simply playing your deck. The tokens you made could even help cast Hogak, since you could use them to convoke for a discount. Since the tokens were black, they could even pay for the colored mana Hogak needed. Even though Bridge from Below was powerful, it wasn't the true problem card, that was Hogak. But since the card had just recently come out in the then new Modern Horizons set, they didn't want to ban such a new card. But Hogak Arisen Necropolis wouldn't last, as just 1 month later in August of 2019, it was banned alongside Faithless Looting. Stoneforge Mystic was also finally freed on this list. The same reasons for Bridge from Below were banned can be extended to Hogak. The card was absurdly powerful and could be cast as early as turn 2. And an 8/8 that had Trample is nothing to scoff at. Not only that, you could cast it from your graveyard as well, so even if it was hit by a mill, it didn't even matter. It puts Dredge way too much to the top of the metagame, and the Bridge from Below ban did nothing to curb the deck's power, so Hogak was finally given the boot. And it took Faithless Looting alongside with it. Since it both drew cards and sent cards you wanted into the graveyard for just 1 mana, it was a staple of Dredge decks, like Hogak, or really any graveyard setup deck like Phoenix. Since it had Flashback as well, you even got to use it twice, not just once. It was fantastic at getting all the cards you wanted into the graveyard while getting cards you wanted in your hand there. Frankly, it's probably one of the more fair cards on Modern's ban list, and it's probably fine to return, but has yet to do so. During this era of Modern, graveyard decks were the top decks, so much so that people were main decking hate cards like Rest in Peace and Leyline of the Void to combat them. To help open up the metagame, Stoneforge Mystic was unbanned in an effort to push the format towards adding in creature combat decks that rely on card advantage instead of just the graveyard. As I mentioned earlier, Stoneforge Mystic is still played in Hammer Time decks, which is a top Modern deck, but not one that dominates the metagame. Fun fact about Stoneforge Mystic, it is currently the last time a card has been unbanned in Modern since the recording of this video. Uh-oh, Eldrazi time! The first ban list of 2020 came in January where Oko, Thief of Crowns was banned alongside with Mox Opal and Mycosynth Lattice. Do we even need to talk about Oko? It's one of, if not the best Planeswalker card ever printed. For a plus ability, you got to turn any potential threatening creature or artifact into just a vanilla elk. It basically got rid of any creatures, and Oko itself was hard to deal with since it came down with 4 loyalty, and it only get more for each creature it elked. An easy to cast, basically controlled game ender turned out to be amazing, who would have thought? It's banned in basically every format but Vintage and Commander for a reason. Mox Opal was a pretty big staple in many decks of the format, but it was with Urza Lordahai Artificer that the card was finally pushed too far. Mox Opal was capable of letting the deck have incredibly fast starts since Urza was built all around artifacts. It was easy to hit its threshold, and you can even do it on turn 1 if you have Gilded Goose and Mistress Bauble in hand, since Mox Opal counts itself for Mellowcraft. It being a free mana rock that let Urza get ahead of the game so quickly was phenomenal, and Mox Opal ate the banned bullet, hurting other more fair decks that played it, but Wizards deemed it was time for the card to go, and was likely only getting it more problematic as time went on. Mycosynth Lattice was banned because of Karn, the Great Creator. Since it prevents all artifacts from activating their abilities, and Mycosynth Lattice made all permanent artifacts, it just shut down your opponent. They couldn't even tap lands because doing so is an activated ability. Karn only affects your opponent, so this floodgate was just one-sided. You still got to play while your opponent just sat there with whatever creature they had at the time. You didn't even need to play the card in the main deck, as card could just fetch it out from your sideboard. The combo did already exist with Stony Silence, but Karn cut the need to play it at all and cut off it from affecting yourself. Karn didn't need to get Lattice and can only get any other artifact you need at any given time, and it pushed the card being too powerful that led to it being banned. We have one more Eldrazi ban in March of 2020 where Once Upon a Time entered the ban list. If a spell can be cast for free, there's a very high chance it's good, especially when it provides you with free mana fixing or a creature. It made it so you could commit to greedier hand keeps because it was a free spell you could play as long as the first spell you played in your turn. It didn't add a basic land or a specific type of land either, letting you easily pull whatever land you needed to ensure you could cast your spells. Once Upon a Time was one of the most played cards in Modern during its legality due to how much consistency it provided with no downside. You didn't even need to play green because you could cast it for free, and it was banned because of it. At first glance, the last ban card of 2020 may seem strange, and in July of that year, Alchem's Astro Bauble was banned. The strength of Alchem's Astro Bauble is that it let any deck that normally would struggle with multiple colors easily splash other colors. It could turn any land into one that taps for any color, and unlike other cards like it with this effect, it only costs 1 mana and doesn't sacrifice itself to do so like a Chromatic Star. All you needed was a snow land to cast it, something you could use fetch lands to get. Since Astro Bauble let you tap for any color, you could skimp out on dual lands in favor of running more snow basic so you'd be able to cast it. In addition to all this, it draws a card upon entering the battlefield to immediately replace itself with a fresh card in your hand. It did way too much for very little cost, and this deceptively simple card was banned out of Modern. Fun fact, it's also banned in Legacy and Pauper, but it's strangely legal in Penny Dreadful. We're at the home stretch with the only Banlist of 2021 for Modern, but it was a big one, with Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary, Simian Spirit Guide, Thibault's Trickery, and Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath all being banned. Let's start with Uro. Basically, it was a staple of mid-range control decks that did a whole lot for one card. It drew you cards, gained you life, and ramped you by letting you put lands from your hand onto the battlefield, all while being a 6/6 that was pretty hard to get rid of. You could escape it out of your graveyard easily, especially in decks that played it as you would naturally be casting a lot of spells. Even if you got rid of it, unless you exiled it, Uro could always return. It made decks that wanted to grind out long games far too good, and Uro was taken out of the format. It's also banned in Pioneer and Historic, and it was even almost banned in Legacy. Field of the Dead is another card that was banned in the same formats that Uro was, funnily enough. With how many different lands Modern plays, it was easy to hit the threshold of having 7 lands with different names on the field. It was especially strong in Amulet Titan decks that provided another layer of consistency by having another win condition. It could also be backed up by Scape Shift, which let you get as many zombie tokens onto the battlefield as lands you sacrifice. It could be searched out easily with Golos Tireless Pilgrim and Primeval Titan, and was just too good at what it did to stay in the format, especially with how many ways that would tutor for it. As for Mystic Sanctuary, this card is especially strong for utility land because it's considered an island unlike the other ones. This means it can be brought up through fetch lands. It's a solid effect as well, letting you get any instant or sorcery out from your graveyard. You could even loop it with Cryptic Command by returning it to your hand, so you can put Cryptic Command back on top of your deck to have constant access to a counterspell, draw, and bounce. With its claim, Mystic Sanctuary provided non-interactive games and repetitive game plans, and being the ban-worthy to open up deck diversity by running in control decks. As always, a card that gives you free mana is always bound to be good, and Simian Spirit Guide is no exception. By exiling from your hand, you got a free red mana. While it's a small amount of mana, it could still let you play things ahead of your mana curve. It was often seen in aggressive combo decks, and what put it on the radar were Thibault's Trickery decks. While there were other decks that played it, it was basically exclusively played in fast combo decks meant to win early on, and Wizards didn't want that in the format, so they were banned out of Modern. Thibault's Trickery wasn't actually deemed problematic through win stats. In fact, they said that the win rate wasn't problematic at all, but it just made for too many non-games where Thibault's Trickery went off and it won right away, or it never got to the combo and it just lose. The deck ran only Violent Outburst, so you'd always cascade into it Thibault's Trickery that would then counter the Violent Outburst and lead to you being guaranteed to bring on Emrakul the Aeon's Torrent with it and win the game off that. Emrakul was basically impossible to get rid of 99% of the time, and it often won the game when it hit the battlefield. It wasn't seen as an overly powerful deck, but it was one that was unfun for both parties whether the combo was played or not, so Thibault's Trickery left the format. Woo, almost done. Just 1 year left to go, and that's 2022, where there were 2 banlists. With the first banlist in March of that year, where Lurrus of the Dream Den was banned. Lurrus is one of the best cards ever printed, so much so that it's one of the very few cards that had to be banned in Vintage for power level reasons, while normally cards are only restricted to 1 copy per deck. But this was because you only needed 1 copy as your companion. To run a companion, you had to follow a very specific deck building restriction. In Lurrus' case, no permanent spell could cost more than 2 mana. Companions originally acted as if they were in your hand at any time, being able to cast from your sideboard directly. Being such a powerful mechanic, it had to be errata so that you had to pay 3 mana to add it to your hand before being able to cast it. Even then, many were still too good, and Lurrus was the star companion. The restriction didn't matter when you wanted to play a deck with a low curve anyways, begging for a free card that would recycle all your cheap permanents. You could draw cards for free with Mistress Bauble, and bring back cards like Ragavan and Esper Sentinel, and it made the format very heavy on low to the ground strategies. The downside of playing cheap spells is that you run out of them quickly, but when you just recast them with Lurrus, it was almost trivial, and it entered the realm of broken cards that had to be banned in basically every format but Vintage and Commander. Oddly enough, it's still legal in Historic. And we've made it to the last banned card, and that came in October of 2022, where Yorion the Sky Nomad was banned for dexterity reasons? Wizards said that as paper play began to return after being put on hold due to, well, the whole thing that happened in 2020, they wanted shuffling to not become a large issue, especially since there was a lot of shuffling going on in Modern due to fetchlands and the like. They admit the decks built around Battle of Wits existed, though they were never really competitive, unlike decks playing Yorion. But as funny as this is of a reason, they do go on to say they looked at player feedback and took it into consideration for its ban. It often led to repetitive gameplay, and due to how much shuffling and triggers it has to go over, led to a lot of downtime for the other player too. And sure, Yorion was the next on the companion chopping block to go, so keep your hear the Oathbringer close before they take it too. Woo-wee! We've reached the end of the video. Modern has had a lot of bans. With a non-rotating format, it's almost expected, even if it might artificially rotate with certain products. Despite all this, Modern is still one of the most popular constructed formats in all of Magic, if not the most popular. It's certainly a high-powered format, pushed even further with Modern Horizon sets, but one is actually surprisingly varied. I'm sure there'll be other bans like for that stupid monkey or that big dumb dragon. But whether or not that actually happens, who knows? And who knows when we'll see cards getting unbanned, something we haven't seen since 2019. Either way, I hope you enjoyed the history of the Modern ban list. This took way too long to make, so if you do like it, be sure to leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. I've been JPEG, thank you for watching.